weird watching yourself talking. So tonight's lecture is about some archaeological work that we have been undertaking at Smallhythe in Kent, which is a National Trust property. And I just wanted to set it in context, looking at the National Trust sort of regionally, just so you have an understanding of sort of where it is and the sorts of things that we do. So as David mentioned, I'm the archaeologist for Kent and East Sussex, and also more recently, West Sussex and Greater London as well. So my portfolio is quite extensive. So I'm covering the property portfolios for Morden, Osterley, Ham in Greater London, Ighton Moat, Chartwell, and those are the sort of head properties, all of those. So they all have other properties underneath them. So for Ighton Moat, for example, we have the moat itself, but we also have St John's Jerusalem, which is a scheduled ancient monument, a property of the Knights Hospitaller, and so on. So moving further down into Kent and East and West Sussex, I cover Knowle, Sheffield Park, Standen, Nymans, Scotney Castle, Bodiam Castle and Bateman's, Whitecliffs and Winchelsea portfolios, and Sissinghurst. And it is within Sissinghurst portfolio of properties that Smallhythe is a part. So within Sissinghurst, we have Sissinghurst itself, Smallhythe Place, Lamb House and Stoneacre. And we are obviously tonight going to be focusing on Smallhythe, which is just here. So right on the border between Kent and Sussex. So a really fascinating area to work in archaeologically, and also a place of great environmental change and landscape change. So that's been a particularly interesting aspect of the work, and something that I'll touch on as we go ahead. So Smallhythe Place itself is probably most famous for, at the moment, for two things. So the first is it's famous as the home of the Victorian actress Ellen Terry, who lived there in the late 19th century until her death in the early decades of the 20th century, and a subsequent occupation by her daughter and partners. Her daughter was called Edy Craig, and it was really Edy who drove making Smallhythe into a museum in honour of her mother, and setting up the Barn Theatre on the site. The other thing that Smallhythe is well known for is its history as a site of medieval shipbuilding. So here we're looking at a little diorama from the Tenterton Museum, so just up the road from Smallhythe Place, which shows, now I'm going to see if I can get pointers and things working here. This is Smallhythe Place itself, and this is a sort of an idea of what it might have looked like with shipbuilding in action on the site. So essentially the archaeological works that have been undertaken over a number of years, not just our most recent excavations, have been trying to understand sort of how accurate this picture might be. Where is the shipbuilding actually taking place in Smallhythe? We are talking about large vessels being built here. We're talking about ships for the Royal Navy, so that we're not talking about small scale shipbuilding. It grows into a substantial industry in this, what is now a very, very, well, tiny hythe, as my kids call it, a small place. So again, from Tenterton Museum, we do have lots of artifactual evidence, as well as the documentary evidence that demonstrates this maritime activity of shipbuilding taking place in the vicinity. So for example, here we're looking at a medieval woodworking axe, which was found in a garden in 1997 and was identified by John Clark, who I'm sure many of you know from the medieval curator at the Museum of London. And these are the kinds of implements that would have been in common daily use. And at the bottom of the slide, you can just see a picture of a medieval illumination from the British Library, showing one of those axes. You can see at the bottom of the image in use. And this is a depiction of someone building the world's, well, Noah building the world's smallest ark in that picture there. So it was all of these sort of factors around the sort of evidence for shipbuilding in artifactual terms, the documentary references that were known about for Smallhythe shipping that led the time team, I'd imagine, sort of knowing all of this in the 1990s to undertake one of their fantastic 3-day projects in Smallhythe. And here you can see in this photo by Riz Barterwick, Damien Goodburn undertaking a reconstruction of part of a medieval clinker-built ship with Phil Harding just to his right there. Now, Smallhythe attracted the usual team, of course, which you can see at the top left there. So there are some wonderful illustrations by Victor Ambrose, Corenza, Phil, Mick Aston, Robin Day, the documentary historian, and a very familiar face you can see on the right appearing as an expert during the programme, which is, of course, COLAS's president and all-round medieval and Roman archaeology hero, Gustav Mill. So it's been really lovely to be able to talk to Gus and to have him down to visit our most recent excavations. And of course, he had lots and lots of thoughts during the programme about the locations of the shipbuilding, the activities around it. And I do recommend, if you haven't seen the Time Team episode, you should be able to find it on YouTube and do give it a watch. So one of the most brilliant bits, I think, of the Time Team programme is the National Trust custodian of the time being very, very strict with the Time Team and basically saying in no uncertain terms that they were not to be excavating within the garden. So here we're looking at a plan of the National Trust holding. So I'll just get the cursor going again. This is Smallhythe Place. This is the barn. We've got various ponds and water features, and the gardens run around the property, running up to the north towards the chapel and the priest's house. So all of this is Smallhythe Place Gardens, and that is where Time Team were not permitted to go. Where they were permitted to excavate was to the east of Smallhythe Place in what's called the Forestall Field over here, and to the west in Elfwick Field. And overlaying here, you can see the hatched areas, which represent the areas that they undertook geophysical survey. And you can also see the outlines of their trenches. So we've got trenches 4 and 5 in the Elfwick Field, 6 and 7 in the Forestall Field, and also some indications of where the medieval shoreline might have been and some suggestions as to what these features in the landscape that they're investigating may have represented. So Tenterden Museum holds the archive for the Time Team excavations. So that comprises a very large amount of 14th and 15th century brick samples. So in Trench 5 in the Elfwick Field, they came down onto a brick kiln, and you can see that we've got these very sort of vitrified burnt examples of brick in some of the surviving examples in the museum, and also a lot of the very, very characteristic metalwork that we would expect to find on a medieval shipbuilding site. So we have ship's nails and also roves. So you can see here we've got a nail with a rove, that's an R-O-V-E, attached. So a rove is essentially like a washer that goes on the end of a nail, and it's to help fix planks on a vessel together. The other item, along with all these other things that they hold in the Tenterden Museum, is a fragment of ship's timber. So this didn't actually make the cut of the programme. I think, from what I understand, it was found just after the filming had been completed. But this, again, is excellent, further corroborating evidence for shipbuilding at the site. And potentially also, moving towards these ideas of, if you've got shipbuilding, are you also seeing ship repair and ship breaking, none of which would be surprising at a maritime, as a nautical site like this. So all of those activities may well be represented at the site at Smallhythe. So what we're looking at here, and my apologies for the quality of my phone photo, I was ridiculously overexcited when I saw this actually, is a fragment of a medieval vessel. So we've got part again here of a clinker-built vessel, probably around the end of the 15th century is the period to which it has been dated. So exactly right for the main period of shipbuilding at Smallhythe, which runs from at least the early decades of the 15th century, so certainly from 1400, but quite probably from before that, right the way through to the middle of the 16th century. So the sort of 1540s is the last major phase of royal shipbuilding at Smallhythe. Although shipbuilding, again, quite possibly did carry on in a smaller way beyond that. But there are all kinds of reasons why, largely related to the environmental conditions and the changing landscape, why the site at Smallhythe was no longer suitable for building very large vessels, because the channel of the River Rother, which is the main waterway next to the site, was silting up. So Gustav published an article in Archaeology Cantiana about the excavations at Smallhythe with Peter Bellamy, I think 2003, and it is available online. And it really helps to set in context not only the site at Smallhythe, but also the landscape within which it lies, which is a really exciting and very dynamic landscape to be working in. So essentially what we're looking at is we've got Smallhythe here, and Smallhythe is now a tiny little village next to what's called the Reading Sewer, so next to a very small waterway. It would have looked completely different in the past, and at different stages in its past, it would have looked completely different because, as I mentioned, this is a very changeable landscape, and it's all to do with that changeability is all to do with not only environmental, just a wider environmental change, but also to do with land reclamation across the Romney Marsh and breaches in river walls, silting up of river channels, the construction of dams, all of which affects the flow of the river and affects the flow of the traffic that is able to go up and down the river. So we will be touching on a few other sites through this talk, including briefly Bodiam, Appledore and Winchelsea. So just to set Smallhythe in that sort of wider landscape context. Pardon me. So following on from the time team work, my predecessor at the National Trust, Caroline Thackeray, commissioned Archaeology Southeast to undertake a whole series of further sort of assessment works at the property. So this included what we call vernacular building surveys, so standing building surveys of all of the properties that we hold. So Smallhythe Place, the Priest's House, the barn, and also Yew Tree Cottage, which is basically in the Elfwick field. Those were all undertaken by David and Barbara Martin in 2005. Also during 2005, it was a really fantastic historic landscape assessment by Richard James, which really helped to start mapping out the sort of wider landscape around Smallhythe and within those fields that I mentioned earlier, the Elfwick field and the Forstall field. So to put it in context, here is the Reading Sewer at the bottom of the image. As I mentioned, this is now a much, much smaller channel than it would have been in the past. You've got the main road, as it now is, coming down from the town of Tenterton here. And you can see that the team has marked up in a variety of colours and tried to phase the different landscape features that they could see in the field. So these are not necessarily features that have been excavated, and in many cases also not features that have been surveyed with geophysics, because the time team geophysics did not extend across the whole of the Elfwick field or the Forstall field. I don't think they had time. So we've got a series of landscape features that are potentially medieval in date, so boundaries and trackways and drainage and water features. We've got the buildings at Smallhythe themselves, which date to around 1480 to 1500 is the suggestion, possibly as late as 1520 is the suggestion for the Priest's House and Smallhythe Place. The barn is a little bit later, that's into the 1700s. And then we have later features like Yew Tree Cottage and some of the sort of land divisions that you can see and later National Trust buildings. Also a part of this landscape assessment work was a fantastic documentary survey and assessment by Dr. Jill Draper. So really, really useful in terms of highlighting further investigations that could be undertaken within the very rich documentary history for Smallhythe from around the 14th century onwards. 2006, there's essentially a piece of developer-led work. So a new water, and I think it's a sewage system that went in. So here's the barn, and they cut a long pipe trench out to the new water treatment plant there, and a second pipe trench running to the north of the barn. So one to the south, one to the north. And this revealed everything. It's a sort of multi-period slice through the Forstall field here. So they went back through part of the Time Team trench, so you can see the L shape there. Some really nice medieval, post-medieval and Victorian finds, so telling us a little bit more about both the shipbuilding activity in this sort of part of the site, the later use of the site as a farm, but most interestingly, the first evidence for Roman activity also in these sort of deeper pipe trenches. First to 3rd century activity, some pottery, some ceramic building material, and the tentative suggestion from the specialists at Archaeology Southeast was that it was possibly indicative of a villa site, but obviously no structural remains really to go on with that. So at Smallhythe, we have everything, it appears, on this side of the road, on the eastern side of the road, from Roman right the way through to Victorian and modern. A small intervention removing a rockery in the garden revealed this. So this is presumably the reason that the rockery was there. This is a little bit of late Victorian, early 20th century infrastructure. So probably what was originally a donkey-driven well, later replaced by a machine structure here, you can just see. So this is basically a water lifting device for the farm and for Ellen Terry. So recorded by Maggie Henderson for us. And then in 2017, the pond itself to the south of Smallhythe Place was dredged. A completely negative watching brief in this instance, which was, both a shame, but not necessarily a surprise, because you might have expected that the pond would have been regularly dredged through its life. Maybe somewhat surprising to find absolutely nothing, and certainly a bit surprising not to have found any of this structure that you can see in the image here. So Ellen Terry may have added all of that material, and it may have simply been removed once she left, but the pond certainly doesn't retain that amount of masonry in it, and there was no structure like that for the archaeologist to record. So really interesting piece of work there, even if it was a negative watching brief. 2018, we commissioned Matthew Champion to undertake a graffiti survey of all of the buildings for us. So recording things like ritual protection marks. This is a taper burn mark, so the sort of thing that you add as a kind of inoculation to your building. So you burn a little bit of it in the hopes the rest of it doesn't burn down. And we have quite a number of these in Smallhythe Place. And also Matthew looked at the surviving wall paintings in the southern room of Smallhythe Place, which are, nice wall paintings and suggest a building of some quality in the 16th century. As I mentioned, he did look at all of the buildings for us. So he looked at the priest's house, which you can see on the left in this archive photo from the 1900s, with the chapel, St. John the Baptist Chapel just behind. And there's a really spectacular compass-drawn design in the priest's house on some panelling, which the panelling may not be in situ to the property. So it's an interesting and intricate design, but you can see that it hasn't quite worked. There are a few mistakes in it. And finally, he also surveyed the Barn Theatre for its historic graffiti, which relates not only the sort of ritual burn marks and things like that, which relate to its earliest period of use, but some really wonderful graffiti relating to its use as a theatre. with the big names of the time who have left their names on the walls, so people like Sybil Thorndike and so on. So really, really wonderful to have that record in this space. And alongside all of this, we also have all of the artifactual. I mentioned items held in the Tenterden Museum. There are also items that have been found at Smallhythe itself, some of which are still held on the property. Some of them, like this one though, aren't. So this ancient tear bottle that you can see in the reference here is not at Smallhythe and doesn't appear to be at the Tenterden Museum as far as we can tell. And my thanks go to Robin, the curator at the museum, for looking. We think it's probably something that looked like this. So this is an example from the National Trust collections at Appledore. It's probably not, it probably isn't a Roman artifact. These are the little post-medieval sort of glass bottles, possibly for medicine. But it's a rather romantic suggestion of a Roman tear bottle. And I would be fascinated to know if the British Museum do have it in their stores somewhere. Other items in the collection, we've got these, which are, as you can see, dug up at Smallhythe. They're labelled as Benedictine Abbey tokens, but what they actually are is Nuremberg jetons. So these are trading tokens, so telling us a bit more about Smallhythe's interconnectivity with the sort of wider world. Just realised I'm going to have to really speed up quite a lot here. And also things like hop tokens in the collections, chance finds from the gardens include things like this lovely thimble at the top there. And then most recently from within the house itself, tucked into the fireplace, we have this receipt, probably Victorian, which is for timber, so a shipping receipt essentially, just sort of demonstrating again that link to Smallhythe's maritime past. Finds from the garden, like this late 15th, early 16th century large fragment of ceramics as well. So things are still appearing with regularity when areas are turned over. So in 2019, the Hastings Area Archaeological Research Group came to do geophysical surveys for us in the Elfwick field, in the gardens, and in the Forstall field. Their report is absolutely fantastic and really has helped to direct the excavations that we undertook last year. So this is the magnetometry survey for the Elfwick field, so extending the area that was surveyed by Time Team, which is kind of this lower area. They did note on Time Team that they'd found something that looked a bit busier, but they didn't have time to put a trench in it. So Kevin's survey extends that to the fuller extent of Elfwick field. You can see where the trench over the kiln was located here, and this incredibly busy and dense picture of activity, pits, alignments, trackways, all sorts of things going on in there. The other thing that's of significance of the survey by Haag is they did discover a lot of surface finds that were almost entirely Roman in date. So again, suggesting Roman activity in the area, but this time on the western side of the road. So yeah, Romans starting to pop up everywhere. So in 2020, we had funding from the Inclusive Archaeology Fund and from the Royal Archaeological Institute to undertake a short community archaeology project. So some excavations, some finds processing to do further documentary research. We had a public engagement program in mind, and we hoped that we'd be able to institute some new engagement and research opportunities. Of course, everyone knows what happened in 2020, so the project was postponed, thankfully not cancelled, and we were able to run it last year in August 2021. So we boldly sally forth. I was delighted that my co-director on the project, the field director, was Elliot Ragg, who I'm sure many of you are familiar with from his work on the Thames Discovery Programme and his expertise in all things ships. So off we headed for the dig 2021, never two people to undersell ourselves. We went straight in with the Sutton Hoo references. We're looking for ships, we're looking for medieval ships. We're hoping we'll find them. And there was the possibility, even in August, of some truly horrendous weather, which did actually come to pass. All the photos you're going to see are sunny photos, but we did have some real weather. So These are the areas that we were focusing on. The blue lines represent where the farmer needed to maintain the fields for livestock. So initially we were going to have to fence off the Elfwick field. We didn't have to do it in the end, but we were restricted to this area in the Forstall field, this southern area. We had cattle in that bit to the north. So we selected 7 different areas to open trenches, so targeting some of the areas that Time Team had investigated, looking for evidence of the medieval shoreline at the bottom here, targeting some of the sort of particularly dense areas of activity in the Elfwick field, a first trench in the Smallhythe garden, and another trench just to the west of Time Team's interventions in Forstall. And here's a more detailed plan from Alistair Oswald, which shows the sort of scale of those trenches. So this is very much an evaluation exercise to try and help us to understand a little bit more about the site and to follow on from Time Team's work. We essentially had 10 days of excavation compared to their 3. So first day, first trench, pretty much first scrape with the digger, and Roman ceramics, very nice, very unabraded, Samian ware, straight out of the topsoil almost immediately, and it really carried on from there. Now I'm going to try and play this little video in the hopes that you can hear it.
So when we expected to find a lot of medieval pottery items like this 14th century show, what we've managed to come up with a number of trenches is Roman. So yeah, the Romans have been a bit of a surprise.
So that was Matthew Champion. So he's our finds supervisor for the dig 2021, and I think he's understating just how surprised we were about maybe the volume of Roman material. We might have expected some, given the sort of background noise that we had from excavations in Forstall, from the surface finds in Elfwick, but really the volume of Roman material took us by surprise. And maybe what we thought we were looking at in terms of all those geophysical signals as potentially medieval activity is much, much more likely to actually be Roman. So I'm just going to quickly whiz through some of the trenches. Oh, I'm not going to stop Matthew again. So the largest intervention was trench 3, and the vast majority of the Roman ceramics came out of trench 3. So in total across the site, we had around 2,700 sherds of Roman pottery. That's around 31 kilos of Roman pottery. And as I say, the vast majority of it came from this slightly larger intervention in trench 3. So this is just a snapshot to give you a little insight into the volume. It's a source of enormous pride and a huge thank you to all of the volunteers, and in total there are around 60 to 70 volunteers who came and worked at Smallhythe in August, that we not only excavated all of this material, we also processed it all on site. So it was all washed and processed and ready for the specialists by the end of the 10-day excavation. So you can see the kinds of material that's coming out. We have a range of different types of ceramic. We have everything from domestic wares, imported wares, we have Samian, we have amphora, we have bowls, we have beakers, we have flagons. So on the right you can see Gail excavating a flagon there. So whatever is going on at Smallhythe in the Roman period from around the 1st to the 3rd century is quite, it's reasonably significant activity, significant enough that there's quite a lot of material culture kicking around. There are also, is it 9 stamped tiles? I think it was 8 of which are stamped with the stamp of the Classis Britannica, so the Roman Navy. So, I mean, this is literally just a tiny snapshot of the volume of ceramic building material that was also recovered from the site, which is currently being assessed by Kevin and Lynn Cornwall. And it will be really interesting to hear more about what that might be telling us. And, it's certainly indicative of a building somewhere not a million miles away. So everyone in Trench 3, as you can see, there was extremely happy. Elliot and I, however, was not panicking exactly, but slightly concerned about the not so much medieval activity as we were hoping for. And we gradually came to the sort of dawning realization that we were actually digging in the wrong place. Yeah. Not all in the wrong places, however. Trench 2, and here you can see John and Angela at work recording, did turn up some evidence for medieval activity. So this is the trench closest to the road in the Elfwick field. So here we have evidence for backyard activity. Chalk surfaces, medieval ceramics. Also quite a lot of Roman pottery came out the bottom of this trench as well. So there's also trench 2. We started seeing some of the kind of evidence we would expect for medieval shipbuilding taking place nearby, so some nails and also some of the roads. So you can see those very distinctive diamond-shaped roads there, and that's James Elliott from Christchurch, Canterbury University, who kindly undertook some X-ray for us with Dana Goodburn Brown. Trench 5, cracking bit of survey relocating by Kevin enabled us to come straight down onto part of the time team trench. So you can see our ranger Pete from Sissinghurst excavating and coming down onto the tarp that the time team had left. We actually went just through their excavations to see if we could find the floor of the kiln that they recorded, which we did. And a small intervention through that also showed that there is potentially another kiln structure lying underneath it. Over in the garden at Smallhythe Place, this is trench 6, was sited just here to investigate these anomalies shown in the resistivity survey by Haag. We were also interested to see if we could sort of help to define the medieval shoreline in the garden with this trench. And it's essentially what we came down onto was a series of kind of cobbled surfaces and land drains. So nothing medieval came out of this trench whatsoever, which was really interesting. And it appears that it went straight from sort of Victorian 20th century land reclamation and sort of surfacing straight down into silty deposits. So Elliot did some boreholes through that. Which is, it was useful. So it essentially is a trench kind of in this area just over here. So it would originally have laid outside of the Smallhythe Place gardens. I mentioned the boreholes. Jane Siddell from Historic England, and also you can see Sadie Watson from Museum of London Archaeology also joined us through the excavation. It was really helpful to be able to have that sort of added aspect to our work of having a Roman specialist on site and also having a geoarchaeologist on site to help us to understand those kind of land formation processes we were seeing in the boreholes. Trench 7, the final trench, was in the Forstall field, which was also, as you can see from the image, our campsite. And we had a number of students join us from Cardiff and York universities. This trench in Trench 7 came straight down onto, unexpectedly, the Victorian and 20th century midden for Smallhythe Place. So we have basically Ellen Terry's gin bottles and champagne and water bottles and marmalade jars and things like that. So a really wonderful snapshot of that later use of the site. And it all went a bit Ellen Terry really at that point. The very famous beetle wing dress is normally resident at Smallhythe, so one of Ellen Terry's most famous costumes. They still have a replica of it on site, and they very kindly let us wear it one evening. So we all had a go at dressing up and pretending that we were Lady Macbeth, and here you can see Sadie reenacting that. A final piece of work that we undertook this summer was a metal detecting survey. So you can see James Ward here. He's a mudlarker from the Thames, and he surveyed in the gardens and also sort of checked spoil heaps and so on. A couple of star finds really to highlight from James's work. The first is this little sort of decorative piece of jewellery, a cameo dating to around 1825. And Nikki, who is the House and Collections Officer at Smallhythe Place, was saying it's possibly something that was purchased by Ellen Terry as a piece of, or Edy Craig as a piece of costume jewellery to use in the theatre. So a really lovely find to have from the gardens. But James's absolute star find is this. This is a strip of roves, uncut, So this is really fantastic evidence for manufacturing of this metalwork nearby. So these are the original things that haven't been cut up and attached to anything else as yet. So they're definite evidence of shipbuilding. So as I said, we did try, in spite of COVID, to do as much public engagement as we could. So we ran a couple of guided tours. We were, obviously the property was open to the public during August last year. So we did lots of engagement with visitors, and hopefully people really enjoyed coming and seeing a bit of archaeology in action. So that was all just 5 months ago, which doesn't seem that long. So I'm just going to spend the last 10 minutes or so, if that's okay, just talking about where we go from here. So we've been doing lots of kind of looking, well, I've been doing lots of sort of looking along with other people at all kinds of other evidence and thinking about what other sort of sources of information we could look at, and doing some fundraising and hopefully getting everything set up and ready for a second season of excavation this summer, which we do plan to undertake, having had a successful funding bid in August, again, 2022. So the dig 2022 is on. Hopefully it is on, it's definitely on. So working with Alistair Oswald, who's a landscape surveyor, he's been doing a lot of really fantastic research on things like the LiDAR sort of data for this site, and helping us to understand essentially the lie of the land. So what we're looking at here, this is Smallhythe Place, this is the Elfwick field and the chapel field next door to it, and this is the Forstall field over here. And the blue essentially represents areas that would have been wet in the past. And to be honest, while we were camping in the Forstall field, were wet in the present as well. But you can see just what a huge change has happened to this landscape over time. So this is what the Reading sewer, the north branch of the River Rother, looked like in the early 20th century. So still being used for river transport. We've got a barge here. There's still a crossing, a sort of toll crossing. And we've also got, it's really interesting to note, buildings in this landscape that are no longer there. So even within the last 150 years or so, buildings have been disappearing from this landscape. This is another disappeared building, actually. So we're now standing at the top of the road, looking down towards the river with the Isle of Oxney in the background there. This is Smallhythe Place. This is the priest's house. And this is probably what was the chapel house. So this thatch building burned down, I think, in 1910. As I mentioned, Jill Draper has done a fantastic documentary survey of Smallhythe in 2005. And that's really helpful for helping us understand more of the history of ownership of these places. So at first glance, something called Elfwick Field might be suggested to have quite a strong early medieval link. You know, could be, you could interpret that as an early medieval place name. It's in fact anything but that. It belonged to a family called Elfwick, as you can see in this 19th century document here. In its earlier history, actually, it did belong to the Knights Templar and the Knights Hospitaller, and it was called Queen's Close, but I won't get distracted by that at the moment. Looking at early maps is always really useful and beneficial. This is the first edition OS, and again, just shows us the lie of the land. So we've got Smallhythe, and you can see where the high points are. You know, Pick Hill, Ebony Chapel is actually on its own little island. The site of Reading Street is also very important in a discussion of shipbuilding in the area. And here is the northern branch of the Rother heading down out towards the sea. This is a late 16th century map. This is 1596. And this is wonderful in just showing that actual process of land reclamation taking place. So all of this is reclaimed land. This is all the Romney Marsh and the Walland Marsh over here, all being reclaimed through the medieval period into the sort of later medieval and Tudor periods. We've got Smallhythe just at the top here. I hope everyone can see this. I'm still getting this bar that shows I'm screen sharing, which I know, but I hope everyone is okay seeing it. But anyway, this is the Isle of Oxney in here. We've got a bit more of a detailed view. Smallhythe, Reading Street. This is Ebony Chapel and Appledore. This is the branch of the Rother heading down towards Winchelsea. This is the southern branch of the Rother gradually being reclaimed, and heading up, just upriver here, you can see the site of Newenden. So these are the kinds of vessels that are being built at Smallhythe, probably further downstream as well at Reading Street in the Tudor period. So this is from the Anthony roll, and shows the Henry VIII's Grand Mistress. The Anthony roll dates to 1545. So this is a vessel that was built at Smallhythe. These are substantial, large vessels. So they needed a reasonable amount of water to get in and out. So the channel must have still been reasonably operational into those early decades of the 16th century. And then everything starts tilting up, and the dam, the Nell Dam at the top of the Isle of Oxney, fails. I've realised I've, as ever, tried to pack way too much into this talk, so I'm going to rush through these last ones. I mentioned earlier that you can't look at Smallhythe without looking at it in its kind of wider landscape context. So I've mentioned already Newenden. There are excavations currently underway at Lossenham Farm, looking at the remains of medieval priory. The Isle of Oxney is absolutely key in this discussion, looking at water flows and so on. Appledore. Reading Street is just here, and it's really interesting to notice where we have these really pronounced inlets in Gustav's reconstruction of the landscape in the medieval period. So thinking about that medieval maritime context, down in Winchelsea we have medieval ships etched into what was wet plaster in the Blackfriars Barn cellar. So these are ships dating to around the middle years of the 14th century, so possibly a representation of the Battle of Winchelsea happening just off the coast. On the right-hand side is a ship's drawing in one of the Romney Marsh churches nearby at Snargate, which has been tentatively identified by Ian Friel as the Regent, which was another of the great royal ships that was built nearby at Reading Street. Within the church of St. John the Baptist, the chapel of St. John the Baptist itself at Smallhythe, we have medieval roves being used within the chapel furniture. So the chapel was built post 1514. We also have a shocking great burn mark on the back of the door. So whether they're protecting their building from not burning down, given that the previous one probably did burn down, is quite interesting. So the influence of the church more widely across the landscape cannot be understated. This is the sort of 8th century view of the Romney Marsh, and an awful lot of this land reclamation that is taking place on the marsh proper is being driven by the church. So Appledore and Ebony churches and manor are both owned by Christchurch Priory in Canterbury throughout the medieval period. For your reference, Smallhythe is just over here. There have been excavations at the now abandoned site of Ebony Church, so that the chapel was actually moved from Ebony on one side of the river up to Reading Street on the other. You can still go and visit the chapel, but the foundations were excavated, and that archive resides in Tenterden Museum. So some really lovely painted glass from there. And some really interesting documentary references held in archives like those at Canterbury Cathedral. So I was particularly struck by this particular mid-13th century reference, which refers to someone called Robert the Small, or Parvus, and the fact that he holds lands to the north of the Hythe, or the landing place. And it does make me wonder about, Smallhythe it wouldn't have been a particularly small place in the medieval period for it to be called that. I'm sure it started off as a small place, but it is interesting to wonder whether actually it's also acknowledging a small person in the figure of Robert Small. So we're going to dash further back in time to the Roman period. Tenterden Museum has a very small collection of Roman archaeology. They have a hoard of about 48 coins. They have the remains of part of a Roman road that lies just to the west of Tenterden, so to the north of our site, and a couple of late 4th century coins that you can see on the right. Ivor Margery in the 1940s did identify a branch, as he's described it there, a branch road to the estuary. So Smallhythe is here. The Roman road at Brown's Corner, and another junction up here, runs down into what would have been a channel here, and our Roman sort of evidence is coming from in here. So it is tempting to postulate that we do have some kind of Roman haven or small harbour maybe going on in there, a small landing place maybe. And I do wonder whether the medieval isn't on the other side. This is Barry Cunliffe's 1988 map of the Roman settlements known on the Romney Marsh itself. And it's just interesting to note the sort of difference between that and the medieval period, and the fact that the site at Smallhythe, while it was on the river, was probably, you know, a little bit further sort of inland than it was in the medieval period, when it was a much more of a further sort of coastal kind of site. From the Isle of Oxney, we also have Roman activity, Roman evidence. So in Stone Church, there is this, which is commonly referred to as a Mithraic altar. So it has a bull on it. Andrew Richardson very wisely pointed out that it's quite likely that it's not Mithraic. It might be more to do with, I think it's Apis, who is the Roman god of oxen, and you know, is the Isle of Oxney. So one of Andrew's suggestions was that maybe they were using the Isle of Oxney as a sort of, you know, water surrounded place, as a kind of huge cattle corral, effectively. And to be honest, wouldn't be surprising to see that in the early medieval period too. Roman coinage, we have a coin from Sissinghurst in our collection. We have a couple of Roman coins from the collection at Appledore, so just downriver from Smallhythe. Roman burial evidence from Bodiam. So this is one of the only surviving cremation urn discovered at Bodiam in the sort of antiquarian discoveries. There is also antiquarian records of a cremation urn from Reading Street. So, you know, cremation burials, those sort of Roman burials along rivers and, you know, outside of major settlements and on routeways may well be a possibility. And finally, and I don't want to talk in any depth about Classis Britannica tiles, because this is way out of my comfort zone, definitely, but I have been just, you know, trying to familiarise myself with Roman archaeology, because those of you who know me will know that I'm not an expert by any stretch of the imagination in Roman archaeology. So I've been looking at, you know, reports and records to try and understand it a bit more. And this sort of article about Roman tiles from a few years ago now, so I'm sure needs updating, really struck me in terms of the sites that they were describing. And I went away and looked up Bardown purely because it's down the road from where I live. And I do wonder whether it's the sort of site that we're looking at Smallhythe, a kind of fairly small scale industrial site with residential activity as well. And I wonder whether those sort of 1960s excavations might prove a useful comparison to us. So we're at the end. What's next? We are going to commission some documentary research. Al would like to undertake some further topographic survey. Haag would like to do some more resistivity survey. As I said, we have funding confirmed for a field season in August, so we'll be aiming to get a better understanding of Roman activity, further investigation of the sort of medieval village of Smallhythe, and further sort of refinement of where we think the shipbuilding locations are. And I'd also be really interested to find any evidence that we can for the 1514 Great Fire of Smallhythe, which is only referenced in one documentary source, but apparently was very destructive. So a huge thank you to everyone who took part in the project last year. I hope you've enjoyed this talk. I'm sorry if it was slightly longer than it was meant to be, but thank you once again to Colas for having me along this evening. Thank you so much.
Okay, well,